Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Small Town Tourist Podcast, where we experience and explore everything that makes small towns great. I'm your host, Abby, and today we are hanging out with three really cool guys. I probably could have talked to these guys for another at least hour if it hadn't been for my free Zoom subscription timing out on me. No, these guys were absolutely wonderful. We're talking with the guys who wrote the book Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised. That's Andy Collen, Chris Pomeroy, Dean Jackson, and Lo Semple. We only got to hang out with three of them on the podcast. The fourth couldn't make it. Totally fine. They had such great stories to share, and I'm so excited for you to hear this episode and enjoy our time hanging out with them because they are just a hoot and they got a story for everything. And those are my kind of people. I highly recommend you check out the book Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised. I got a link for you to purchase it down in the show notes below. It's a great read. Please enjoy our time hanging out with these guys. It's just a blast. Are we still waiting on one more, right?
I think so. We might need to start because Lo said he's got a couple things that's tying him up. So he may join in a little bit. So he might chime in if you want to get started and then have him come in. That probably will be what happens, I think.
Sure, I can make that work.
Okay.
Cool. So I start every podcast. We'll just kind of do a round robin here. I'm going to need your name, where you're from, and what you do. And if you want to say that you're from Aspen and then give where you currently live as well, that'd be cool. So we will start with Dean, since you're first on my screen here.
Okay, I'm Dean Jackson. I was born in New Jersey, grew up in Colorado and Aspen, then moved to New York, and now I live in the Bay Area, San Francisco. I head the project management division of a property management firm, and I dabble in acting, which was my passion in college, and obviously in writing.
Wonderful. Chris, you're next.
I grew up in Aspen. I was actually born in Denver, but carried over in a straw basket, as you will. But grew up in Aspen, left Colorado in 2002 and moved with my wife to Athens, Georgia, which is where we live now. We have 2 kids, 2 dogs, 2 cats, and a bunch of fish.
Double down on everything except for those fish. You got to have multiples of those.
Yeah. Got a bunch of those.
Okay, Andy, you're next.
Okay, I'm Andy Collen. I was born in UCLA Hospital. We moved in the mid-70s to Aspen to get away from, because pollution was kind of going up and down. LA was pretty polluted at the time. And so my parents were like, we got to get out of here. And so we moved to Aspen, which at the time was sort of a really amazing little community. Lived there until through college, and then decided that my career, I had sculpted when I was a little kid. I'd make some money by sculpting little characters on the mall and selling them. So art was one of the areas, but in college you go do what your parents tell you to do. So psychology kind of thing. And in college I realized animation is what I wanted to do. So I went to LA and worked for Animation Magazine. And there I realized where all the animators are coming from, and we had a film festival. It was like the biggest one in the States at the time. And so there were people from all over the world sending animation. And I saw Portland actually had quite a few independent animators here. So I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm at now. And I run Happy Trails Animation, which is my own little studio. But through that, I also worked at Will Benton. They did the California Raisins. So that was, training back then. You didn't have, I think there were 3 universities that did animation at all, like CalArts, RISD, and there might have been one more. But the only way to learn was to go out and get a job and go do it in the trenches. And so I ended up being at that time frame where it was switching out. And so I ended up doing it that way. And I got out to work at Jim Blashfield. He did a lot of the music videos for MTV, like Tears for Fears, Sowing the Seeds of Love, Boy in the Bubble with Paul Simon. So it's all that photo cutout, really cool stuff at the time. And so I kind of got my foot in the door working for some of those guys, and then ended up doing my own studio. And so that's what we're doing now, is I'm working on doing school safety project for kids. So we're trying to make it where it's fun and nice, comics and, animated little informational stuff. So that's kind of where we're at now.
It's just so interesting hearing where you guys are all at currently, all the different routes you've taken in this life. But the thing that ties you all together is the town of Aspen. And that's what we're here to talk about today is your book, Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised, which is a great title. So you guys all came together to collaborate on this book. Tell me how this project got started.
Go ahead. Well, yeah, I was going to say Andy hit me up a few years ago and said, "Hey, I got this idea. I wanted to pull some people in on an idea of writing a book about growing up in Aspen because it is such a unique area and such a crazy time that we grew up there." And I said, well, just so happens I started writing a bunch of stuff for my kids so they would know that it was a totally different time, and we had a different upbringing than what they had. So as we moved along, we kind of pulled in Dean, and then we pulled in Lo. Lo had done a bunch of stuff for the Aspen Times, and kind of became a pet project both for COVID, and then Andy had some time off, so he had to focus on doing something else. So he was doing
what happened was right before COVID, we were all talking, phone calls back and forth. And I talked to Dean, and then I talked to Chris, and we'd be talking about Aspen in the old times and some things. And I started to realize that a lot of people online on social media, it was like, which year are you? It was like different badges and different things for what times, whether it was the 40s and the 50s, which was, sort of the cowboys and the hippies, or was it the people who came in and sort of set up the businesses, or is it now? And so there's like these different times. It's the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And so everybody's always saying, this is the best time. And what we started to realize was it's an escape. Aspen is away from everything. And so no matter what time it is, it's always going to be cool and a fun place. And so we sort of kind of realized that maybe we should tell our different stories and our different sides and come at it so that when you read the book, you get introduced by my chapter, but then you start to hear all the other chapters and everybody sort of has their own spin on it. Like we all went to similar events, just different, so you hear about what happened at the stage area over there instead of over at the food place. You know what I mean? And so it sort of comes together and weaves together. Like Dean was saying, it's sort of a Venn diagram of that time period.
Chris had put me back in contact with Andy after many years in the 2 years before COVID. And so my wife and I went up to Portland to visit and ended up hanging out with them and kind of rebuilding an old friendship. And my wife became really close with Andy's wife, Amy. And then COVID hit. So we were having these Zoom cocktail hours, what have you, over the course of COVID, pretty much once a week. And that's when the ideas for the book between me and Andy started to percolate. And we all made a conscious decision not to really share with each other exactly what we were writing about and to trust that there would be overlap. And there was. I mean, both Chris and I write about lawn darts.
Or selling newspapers.
Yeah, well, we all wrote about selling newspapers. There's a lot of crossover with what we all experienced, and we kind of trusted that would happen, and that's exactly what happened. And it kind of made the story universal because, it's not only in Aspen that kids sell newspapers.
Yeah. Well, and also you got to remember too, when we say sell newspapers, a lot of people think, oh, you have your route and you go over and you get your papers, and you ride down and you throw them down your neighborhoods like they show you in the movies and stuff. And in Aspen, that's not how they did it. It was a really small town. So
we were hawkers, yeah.
It was cutthroat.
It was a tourist town, and it was a free-for-all. And so all the kids would run down at the end of school as quick as you could get. The bell would go out, and everybody would run with their packs and run down to where the newspapers were freshly printed. And as soon as they'd say go, you'd run across the street, everybody just running, trying to get through past each other. And this was guys and girls. It was the same. It wasn't like everybody was in it. And
it's like a case study in capitalism, It was just this these little preteens just fighting and killing each other to get the sales from all the tourists.
And everybody had their own turf, and they would defend it with their life.
Yeah. These little mafias.
Yeah. Oh, Chris and I had some tricks. We would sell to the drunk people in the bars.
Ooh,
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing about the newspapers is you bought them for a dime. The selling price was 20 cents. You were guaranteed to double your money. But the folks in the bars, they'd give you a $5 bill for a paper.
Yeah, they were a little looser with their fun coupons. One thing about the title that I think is important, especially for readers outside of specifically Aspen, where it really resonates on a generational level in that unsupervised, when we say we were unsupervised, I mean we were unsupervised. It's a Gen X kind of thing universally, but it's almost like exponentially more intense in Aspen where we grew up because we had a free bus system. So we had free access to get all around town. Our parents were all super busy working sometimes two, three jobs just to keep it going. And of course, we had nothing to do when we weren't in school or we weren't on the slopes. So we roamed around and got in trouble, did silly stuff. So it's
I mean,
pretty
there was always
fun.
like parents around, but might not be your parent. And so in a way, we all sort of had mini parents, no matter who you were, what group you hung out with, whether you were the jocks or whether you were the theater person or whether you were the computer. I mean, I was also in early computer stuff. So, I felt like it was interesting because when you are in a small community, you do sort of mix together a little bit more, even though you might be considered one of those other cliques.
Well, I
There's
mean,
a lot
Chris
of
is,
truth to that. There's a story I told before. It's not in the book, but we had a local TV station in Aspen. It was called Grassroots Television, and it mostly just played on replay these tapes of local interviews and real estate for sale and all this stuff. But they would have an occasional ad for some of the bars downtown, and we would always see our friends, our high school and middle school friends, on the dance floor at the bar. And and I was saying, well, what is Klaus doing at the Tippler? Why is he dancing there? He's supposed to be, it's curfew or whatever. And the saying is that the cops knew that we were in the bars and we were doing this stuff. It was just they kind of turned a blind eye to it because it was their way of knowing, hey, they're not going to get in trouble there.
At least they're
Nobody's going to freeze to
supervised in the
death.
bar.
What's that?
I would go to, ironically enough, a place called Dean Street. And when I walked in the door, the bartender would set up a Corona for me on the bar. And I'm 16, 17.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of
I
everybody was watching out for us, but nobody was really looking over our shoulder either.
I remember one time, and I'm not sure Rob Lowe was even old enough because this was right around Breakfast Club time. I remember seeing Rob Lowe in the Tippler, and all the girls were like, "Oh, we gotta go to the Tippler! Oh my god!" And I remember seeing him. I remember seeing him there, and it was pretty funny. I mean, being a kid, you had no idea who would be around when you're in a town like Aspen.
Well, I mean,
And it was interesting too because all of our parents owned the restaurants, owned the stores, owned all this stuff, and so the real thing was these people are here for vacation. They're not here to be entertaining. They're here to. And so what ended up happening, which is cool, is a lot of them would come and they felt so comfortable that it was almost like their extended family in the mountains. And every year they'd come back and it was a very different kind of thing. It wasn't like you just, going to Disneyland. It was like you really you went there almost because it was revisiting your family again. That certain hotel that my friend owned, they loved it so much they'd just go every year.
And the celebrities that would come were treated kind of by unspoken rule by the locals just as a normal person. Either the ones who lived there and were part of the community, or the ones who visited, once, twice a year. It was almost a badge of honor for one of us to just treat them normal and not gush over them, even if there was a little bit of being starstruck in there.
Yeah,
Well,
very true.
I think a lot of it too is we got so used, like John Denver would just show up and sing at the schools and stuff, or whenever there was some event thing, he was always there. He was really a local person. So you just kind of got used to seeing people and just hanging out with them. So as a kid, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, that's so and so. You know what I mean? There was a little bit more like, oh, that's That's Dionne Warwick.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, or yeah, Barbie Benton, or yeah.
The
But I
Eagles,
mean,
yeah, or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
Chris and I would stop by on Halloween trick or treating to members of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band's house, and they would give out 45s, and or I don't know, Chris, were you at the bonfire up in the mine dumps when Bridget Fonda was there?
More than likely, yeah. There were times when she would hang out with groups of our friends, and just
Yeah,
I always thought she was younger than we were. It turns
she
out
was
she was
older.
like 4 or 5 years older than we were.
Yeah,
It's just
I never actually met her. I had a crush on her from across the fire.
It is so interesting hearing these stories. And because, I mean, I grew up in a small town too where I wasn't as unsupervised as my parents' generation was. I hear all the time about my dad saying he hopped on his bike at sunrise, didn't come back till sunset. I had a little more,
exactly, yeah.
I had a cell phone in middle school, so like they knew where I was. But like hearing the fact that you guys are, having bonfires and hanging out, and there's like celebrities here and there and trick or treating at like celebrities' homes, and it's totally
Yeah.
normal. Small town life for me was very different for you, obviously, but it still has its parallels, which is cool.
When I moved there with my parents in, I think, 75, Main Street was not yet paved. It was only paved shortly after that. So it was really a small town.
Yeah, at that time, Telluride had Telluride didn't even have sidewalks.
Yeah,
Telluride had each store had its own like
platform.
sidewalk platform front, and so you'd walk up and down and up and down on these wooden, like an old
Like an old
Western
West,
town.
yeah.
It was crazy, and so we came at that time where it was just changing from the old way into sort of what now is the new way. Only we were there for the very early part of that. So we still had the Swiss villagey stuff around and that fun culture. A lot of people, we ended up, I think a big thing that shaped Aspen a lot in those times was after World War II, a lot of Europeans were trying to get out of Europe and they wanted a place similar to the Alps. So we ended up getting a lot of people from France and Switzerland and Germany and that kind of stuff. So there was this culture in the town itself, you know what I mean, of folks.
Stein Erickson, yeah. Yeah, they built the ski industry around that, really. The 10th Mountain Division, they built the ski hills, and they, re-landscaped so you'd have runs. But then you had the whole Swiss Alps contingency, Stein Erickson and some of the other Olympic skiers that came down, and they literally started teaching people how to ski. That was their whole deal, and it became an industry. And
there's also a bunch of Swedes and Norwegians too there. There was an enclave. It was very interesting because once the skiing set up, you had this other culture that kind of came in because of the skiing, which was really interesting. And again, being a kid and growing up in it as it was happening, I mean, you'd be at the Continental, which no longer exists. It's now the Ritz-Carlton, but it was Grand Central. So CBS would be in the lobby, and us kids would be pawning off ski pins, trading them with the racers and the people from all over the world and stuff. Hey, and so we'd save all the
sneaking
old
around and grabbing jumbo shrimp,
Yeah, it was a fun experience.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So being in the age group that you guys are, did you get kind of like the snowboarding side of it too when that became a fad, or was it still pretty ski central?
Funny you should say that, because I was the one that brought the very first Burton snowboard to the mountains, and Burton and Sims were the two boards. My other friend, we were the two that got the first snowboards for Christmas presents.
Oh my gosh.
We were literally the first ones to throw boards on those mountains.
My dad owned a ski shop, and at the time it was not okay to have snowboards on the mountain. They didn't let you.
Well, Highlands was private, so they did, but
but Andy and his brother would walk around with these snowboards on their back, and there was almost an anti-sentiment towards those stupid whatever those things are. It'd be like, see Andy coming up and be like, what is that, dude? What are you doing?
This was back in the day that those snowboards actually had the fins.
Yes,
yeah. That's right.
And they were convex. It
looked like a surfboard.
Yeah,
almost. Yeah.
But Andy and his brother actually made a business, the Snowboard Brothers.
So my mom, every once in a while, this came in handy. My mom had a wholesale because she did jewelry in when we lived in LA before we moved to Aspen. She had she was making really cool jewelry that she sold to all the stores on Rodeo Drive and all that kind of stuff. So she had a wholesale license. And so when we got to Aspen, we got those for holidays. We were like, oh my God, all our friends would love these. But my dad, like, it was hard to find. He found them in Denver. And even then, it was like the only two they had in Denver. And so we thought, this would be great to make this accessible. And my mom was like, well, I have a wholesale license. We can probably give him a call. I call him up. I'm like 16 years old. And I actually spoke to Jake Burton. And he's like, oh, you really can do that? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, great, let's do it. Okay. So we just started buying and selling boards and stuff.
That is wild.
Yeah. It was fun.
I was a super avid snowboarder. So like hearing this is really cool.
See, but Dean and I we kind of have to trump that one up because we would take the old rental skis out of the dumpster and strap them together with a board and just go straight down the hill with no way to stop.
We went into his dad's shop. We got these old skis, screwed the wooden board onto them, screwed a hole in the front of the ski
with a string.
Tied a string on it and went down the hill holding on for dear life.
Yeah.
That honestly sounds like a blast.
It was fun, but it was terribly dangerous. I mean, literally, there was no way to stop. There was no way to turn. There was no way to just like a rocket, just straight to your destiny. You
jump off is what you do.
Yeah, we put tacks in the wood so that we wouldn't slip off. Yeah. There's no straps on our feet or anything. It was just go for it and pray.
Oh my God.
And then if you bailed, that's holding that string, the thing would go flipping around and, and knock into people and whatever else it was.
And of course, this is the era of no helmets ever.
Yeah. I was just going to say helmets probably didn't exist.
No.
Not for our bikes, we would ride bikes without helmets too. So yeah.
Yeah. Mini bikes and motorcycles. I think Andy had a helmet. My mom bought me a helmet. It was an old football helmet I used for my mini bike in the summer. So
yeah,
Andy did the dirt bikes.
Yeah, I had a motorcycle, so I had a Bell Moto 3 helmet. But that was like, it's so funny because when I met my wife, one of the things, because she grew up in a small town out here, but out here in Portland or in Oregon, it's all lumber, whereas in Colorado it's mining. But there are all these old roads that you go on. So she was out there riding on logging roads, and I was out there riding my motorcycle on mining roads. So it was kind of interesting because she was on a horse, I was on a motorcycle, but it was still out in the woods and out on these trails and doing that stuff. And so that's part of why I feel like our book, we do touch on stuff. It is different. Yes, we do, talk about John Denver and things like that, but that BMX bike riding and that kind of stuff.
Andy, you were a much better rider than I was. I had an Indian 125 that I crashed into a parked car with.
On your first day, yeah.
Yeah, not on my first day, but
I thought it was.
No, I'd ridden it around some, but at this point, my mother was there at the bottom of the hill. We were at the Silver King Apartments. I think this is in the book, right? And I'm riding it up a hill and I hit a rock and go out of control in a wheelie and I slammed into a parked car at the top of the hill. My leg is between the motorcycle and the car. The gear shift gets punched through the gearbox out the other side. I get dragged over the car and land on my knee. I was wearing a knee pad. Now, my mother is watching from the bottom of the hill. I don't recall exactly how old I was. I don't think I was yet 15. And she's like, "Are you okay?" And I stood up. I said, "I'm fine." I started walking and just fell flat.
I'm fine, but I can't move.
And that was the last day I rode a motorcycle.
One thing I was going to say when we back a few conversation topics ago, but you were talking about how the celebrity input was just part of our lives, and it really was, and I think it still is today. Lo would probably be able to tell you more, but Lo he doesn't like to talk about it much, But there was a huge Hollywood contingency in Aspen, and there still is. But back specifically in the 70s and the 80s, they started becoming, people like Oprah Winfrey would show up and just want to hang out and party. But Lowe wouldn't probably say this, and the only reason I bring it up is because he's not here to defend himself. But Lowe's dad was a writer in Hollywood, and he was, at the time we were growing up, he was writing some of the biggest movies and television shows that there were. If you go way back, he did a lot of the Batman.
Oh, he did all the Batman. He did
television show.
Yeah,
I watch that every weekend.
Sock, all that kind of stuff.
I literally watch it every weekend.
Yeah, look for Lorenzo Semple Senior. I think maybe it's second or something. But anyway,
in the 70s, he did Papillon, and
yeah, he did Papillon, and then in the 80s he did King Kong,
70s,
Flash Gordon, and then towards into the early 90s he was writing the movies for, Batman with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Freeze and all these guys, before the current franchises.
Tim Burton stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean. My point being is that we grew up with people like that all the time. I mean, they were just our friends. They were just our buddies. Yeah, we didn't really know necessarily what our friends' parents did for a living. We didn't really talk about it. Sometimes we did.
You found out later in college or something.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
We went to school with Bobby Williams, Andy Williams' son.
Yeah,
I had no idea. know.
And Christian, his older brother Christian was really cool. I've had some good conversations with him.
But yeah, if you listen to the old Andy Williams crooner Christmas records, you can hear Bobby on there when he's a little baby, a little kid, a toddler. You start singing, here's Bobby, and he comes out. It's really funny. But these were just people we grew up with. It didn't even really dawn on us or phase us.
But I think that it put us in a good place to move on in our lives because my life in New York and Andy's life, doing the work that he does, we both have come in contact in later life with celebrities. One of the stars of the Cosby Show was in my wedding. And it's just Andy and I have a mutual friend named Camden who unfortunately
Camden Toy, he just passed away.
But we knew him separately. I worked with him in theater in New York. Andy worked with him on some of his projects.
My Project Monster School, yeah.
So I think we were trained on how to treat celebrities as though they are real people, which is what they are.
Well, and I would say we probably all four are guilty of it. I tell the story of meeting Glenn Campbell in the airport in LA and having a conversation with him and his wife when they were leaving for his farewell tour, where he was starting to suffer with Alzheimer's and just struck up a conversation with him. I had no idea who he was. And it was like, this guy's obviously successful. He's got a wife half his age who's gorgeous, and it's like
key indicator of success right there.
Yeah, I was like, I wonder what this guy did for a living, and I asked him, and he said, well, I'm a musician, and you might have heard of me. And then he, told me some of his songs, and I was like, oh, that's cool.
It's the Rhinestone Cowboy.
That's what I told him. And he was like, yeah, that one. He didn't seem too proud of that one, but he's like, maybe you've heard of some other ones like Wichita Lineman or something like that,
I was at a jazz concert in LA. I struck up a conversation with this kindly old gentleman only to realize that I'm talking to Robert Altman.
Well, so now that's a perfect segue because when I lived in LA before we moved to Aspen, I went to the very first Montessori school on the West Coast in Santa Monica. And it just so happened that Robert Altman's son was in the school. So he was one of my early friends. Before I left, I'd go to his house on the beach and that, and you do the little parties and that kind of stuff, that kind of thing. So, and Cary Grant's daughter, Jennifer, was in my class as well. So it was kind of weird because I came from that in Santa Monica to Aspen. Where it was, to Aspen, where it was like, it almost was just more of the same, I don't know. It was interesting. I was more amazed with the Alps and the mountain. I mean, you just look around and it's, again, we're talking about building these sleds and doing this stuff. Here in Oregon, we have night skiing with lights and all that stuff. Well, there were times I lived right on the base of Aspen Highlands. And I literally, when it's a full moon, it's bright and it's bouncing off the snow. So you literally could go hike up and then board down, at night. And so we would do that too. Again, no helmets and safety gear and all that stuff.
And no one knows where you're at. It's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to cut this short. We have about 5 minutes left here. I don't pay for Zoom. But I have so enjoyed all these wonderful stories that you guys have shared. I'm only a few pages into your book, but I am so excited to dive deeper into it and read more about your guys' life growing up in Aspen, because I have been laughing and enjoying this so much that a book full of stories can only be so much better. So before I let you guys go, give me a quick rundown on where everyone can find this book at.
Well, actually, you can find it almost anywhere because we're doing it through Ingram Sparks, and most companies now will use Ingram Sparks to do stuff. Any local bookstore can order it, and you can also order it on Twist and Turn Press online. That's our sort of setup for our channel.
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles.
Yeah.
You name it.
Yeah, and if you want signatures from all four of us, go to Twist and Turn Press and request a signed copy, and we can get you a signed copy.
And there's also the e-version just came out too.
That's the version I bought because I'm a millennial. So before we totally wrap this up, I would love for you each to give me like an Easter egg for a story people can look out for as they're reading the book. So just like the title or the premise of one of your favorite stories that you each wrote.
Okay.
All right. For me, look out for the mountain lion.
You know what? I think mine would be the snowboarding. I would have to say that was a very interesting time, and it was just because it just seeing something that happened, it was being developed in that time period. And I felt like that was such a great, fun stories of, one of them was about going out there and getting stuck in an avalanche.
I would say mine would be look for the famed author William S. Burroughs. And then I'll speak for Lo. I'll just throw one out for him, which would be the Paperboy stories. Yeah, a good Paperboy story.
Yeah, his chapter on that, he's got a full section on it. We kind of dibble dabble on that. He really covers the whole ecology of being a paperboy at that time. It's pretty great story.
Well, I am so excited to read all of these stories and getting to chat with you guys. We could probably talk for another couple hours here, but I truly appreciate you guys carving time out of your week, especially before the holidays, to do this and talk about your book and share your stories because they're so special.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time as well.
Yeah, thanks. This has really been fun.
Thank you so much for checking out another episode of the Small Town Tourist Podcast. If you want to check out the book, Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised, it is in the show notes below. If you're looking for more content from the Small Town Tourist, you can always find me on my Instagram at the Small Town Tourist or on Facebook at the Small Town Tourist. If you got a suggestion for something you think I should check out, do not hesitate to reach out to me. Send me an email, Abby, ABBEY, at thesmalltowntourist.com.